Thank you so much for coming this morning. I usually, when I'm talking, I am telling other people what to do, but this is a great opportunity for me to actually share with people outside of my circle and talk early in the morning, even though I'm usually prowling around my house drinking tea for another hour or two this time of day. I'm a night owl. Dance and taboo. Mark asked me to take which subject I would like to address, and I thought, wow, what is dance and taboo? What is that word taboo, and how are we interpreting it in this context? I like a challenge, so I decided to take the challenge of taboo. And I haven't used one of these before, so I will see which way it goes when I press this button. Yes. Thank you, Mark, for that beautiful introduction. I think it's really important to acknowledge where we are, and that you did that in such an elegant way. I really appreciate. I am very happy to be working in collaboration with a group called Squamish Eagle Song Dancers. They're a Squamish canoe family, and one thing I've learned in the process of collaboration over 5 years is how to be a good guest. Being a guest, you're expected to introduce yourself as you enter other people's territory or step into their longhouse. And so I wanted to open the talk today by introducing myself. This is my father's side of the family, Edgerton and Alice. They were Jamaican. This is their wedding photo. And when they were dating in Jamaica, before they emigrated to Canada, they dated at the dance halls. They danced all night. They loved it. They had a fantastic time. And they dressed up very fine to do that until they became evangelized, and they went to prayer meeting instead, threw away their finery, and stopped dancing. Now, to me, that is a good example of taboo, dance as taboo. And they're Jamaican. Jamaicans love to dance. On my mom's side of the family, Michael and Margaret. Michael emigrated to Canada at age 5 from Poland with his mother. Margaret was an Irish dairymaid. My grandpa joined the Canadian Army at 16 and got posted in England. That's where they met, and that's where they married. My grandma was a beautiful older woman, and my grandpa was smitten. They had their first 2 children there. So my mother was born in England. My father was born in Jamaica. And that makes me a first-generation Canadian. Both of my grandmothers were housekeepers. My grandmother in Jamaica came over as part of something called the West Indian Domestic Workers Scheme. Because in Canada in 1955, there was a crisis, a severe lack of maids and housekeepers. When Pierre Trudeau was elected, he amended that scheme, which was a temporary worker scheme, to allow permanent immigration. And my grandma brought her kids over one at a time with the help of her employer. My grandpa was a tailor. My granddaddy was a tailor, and he was the last to come over. Margaret and Michael emigrated and bought a farm. So they raised 6 children as devout Catholics, and they had crops, they had horses, they had a cow, they had chickens, geese, dogs, cats, a vegetable garden, and my grandma was a housekeeper, and my father was a factory worker at Massey Ferguson. So I try to remember that when I feel really tired sometimes. They were married for 67 years until my grandma died, and then 6 months later, my grandpa married another Margaret. So I don't know if any of them would have expected who I became, but I did feel very loved by all my grandparents. This photo is from one of my most memorable mountain trips in the Waddington Range of British Columbia, when I was climbing all the time, every day. I don't live that life anymore. I kind of wish I did. It's a very fun and intense way to live. This particular climb is on a peak called Stiletto, which is not the highest peak in the range, but has some very beautiful technical rock climbing on it. And this is a crack that just went up and up and up and up and up, and I got more and more and more excited as I climbed. And it was a dance. For me, climbing is a dance in stone. It is using my hands, my feet, my body to talk to the geology of the planet, to feel that tenuous connection that we have to our Mother Earth. And it became apparent to me as I climbed and as I learned where I could go as a climber, it became apparent to me that I just couldn't spend all my time in the studio as a professional dancer anymore. And I was very lucky to have a lot of time off as a contemporary dancer, being underemployed. So I was able to live a dual life, and I set myself up. I worked as a contemporary dancer where I trained in Winnipeg. And the company I worked for, I was a founding member of. So we didn't have any money, and we worked hard, and we only probably had about 8 months a year of work. And the rest of the time, I lived in Whistler, and I learned to be a rock climbing guide. So then I found out that, rock climbing guides don't actually make any more than dancers in Canada. Partly because as a rock climbing guide, you're only certified to guide on stone. So this particular climb was a recreational climb. I wouldn't be allowed to take clients across glaciers and up into the Alpine. I would have to stick to basic rock routes. Well, not so basic rock routes, but nothing with mixed terrain. When I knew I was going to do this talk, I looked around for some old photos, and I just don't really have any. This was a color laser photocopy that I scanned. That's why it's not very good quality, but it was fun to try and pull something out of the archives anyways. This idea of blending dance and climbing is not just my idea. This is a photo of myself and Vincent Rebour, who is a French choreographer, but started his professional adult life as a professional climber. Now, in France, you can start off as a climber and then discover you're a choreographer and learn to dance and then abandon your sport and become a highly respected choreographer. Vincent is not the only one, and I have to say, I just think it's amazing to have that kind of culture where there's such a fusion of sport and art and that it can go both ways. To recognize dancers as athletes and for athletes to recognize the artistry in what they do and be compelled to create in a new direction. So Vincent was invited by the Center for Mountain Culture to come and be part of the very first vertical dance workshop. And I started my career as a vertical dancer at that workshop. That was in 1997. They built a climbing wall for us. There were two other choreographers, Eliane Favreau-Gravier, who is also a mountain guide and a dancer living in Grenoble, and Amelia Rudolph from Project Bandeloop, who is a long-term friend and mentor to me and to today. Vincent and I are hanging from the climbing wall on stage in this image. Now, I had no other dancers to work with when I moved to BC, not if I wanted to leave the studio and go up into the mountains. So out of necessity, I became a solo performer. And also out of necessity, I started working with filmmakers and guides to capture movement. This is on the Squamish Chief. This particular photo is taken on the Grand Wall route the split pillar pitch, which if you're driving down the highway towards Squamish and you look up at the big, beautiful granite ocean of the Chief, this pitch is in the middle of the wall. It's a classic rock climbing pitch. So actually, as a vertical dancer, it's very interesting to do this film shoot because you would have climbers climbing up the crack and past the route, and we'd be sharing anchors, and I'd be dodging things if they dropped them, which they're not supposed to do. But it was very great for me as a climber because I got to explore these places, get really familiar, take clients to these areas. And then one day I thought, well, why are we just climbing? Where does dance fit into this? You're a dancer. Is this a stage? This is a vertical stage. It is now because I made it that way. And one of my fantasies is, and always has been, to revisit this place, which is very special to me, halfway up the mountain, and make a dance there every 10 years. So maybe one day I'll be a very old lady up on this mountain. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that loneliness of being a solo artist and the only dancer. Dance is a community thing. You want to dance with people and for people. So to be the only dancer wasn't quite enough. I needed other bodies. And in terms of filling space and relating to space, one body can only be one thing. You need the relationships between people in space to actually create choreography, especially if you're going to take it out of the studio. So here I am today. This is a typical email session for me. I like to work outside sometimes when I can, and try not to sit at the computer too much. And this journey, I'm heading around to 20 years now of specializing in vertical dance. So how does that all relate to Taboo? Well, I'm hoping we'll discover that together and you'll ask me some questions that will help. But I thought about it and I thought, well, just off the top of my head, what kind of taboos can I highlight in dance? And let me be frank, when we talk about taboo, I'm not talking about the actual meaning of the word taboo in every sense, because taboos are things that when you break them, they are violations. They create psychological danger, ostracization. Taboo is a very, very serious word, and we're using that in this context. And just to remember that taboo is we're taking a little bit of license with it in some ways. So, these particular taboos, are all from personal experience. Does anybody know what bum roll splits? Anybody, can you imagine what they are? All right. I'm going to just let you imagine them, actually. Next time you go to a dance show, look out for them. Sometimes you'll work for a choreographer and you'll have to tell them, no, I'm not doing that. And that would be one of the things I would have to, as a cranky old dancer, I would have to do. Different forms of dance will have different taboos. So just with a slight tongue-in-cheek, but also a serious edge, I wanted to think about my path in dance, where dance is now, where it has come from in the past, and different cultures, different forms of dance. And I thought I would just point out a few playfully classical ballet taboos. I'd like to say that Ballet BC is taboo breaking in this area. They have definitely not discriminated in this way, except for maybe the bad feet thing, and probably that's one of the last things that you can actually still discriminate against in dance is bad feet, because you just can't stand on point unless you can bend your feet into crazy positions. So forgive me for this, but it is true. It's very rare that you're going to see any black ballerinas, and the chances, the blacker you are, the less chance there's going to be Tall is because, ballet, specifically in the classics, would be, you can't be too much taller than your partners. And it just so happens that many male dancers happen to be of that body type that are compact and springy. So that means that women need to be a little bit shorter, a little bit smaller, so that they can be lifted. And then chubby is an aesthetic thing. And that is not the aesthetic of ballet. So, talking about my own work, now when we get to the company Ariosa, because of the work we do, there are taboos. One of the first ones is to forget where you are. I actually became a vertical dancer pretty much a few days after I backflipped off the Squamish Chief and lived. So forgetting where you are is never a good idea, and you don't want to learn that the hard way. Dismissing anyone's fear and misunderstanding is also a taboo. I really feel for people who look at our work and think, oh, it's so dangerous. They're crazy. And I really always try and take time to let people know that what's important to me as a choreographer is to lift dance into places where you don't expect it to be, to explore dance in places where it has the opportunity to be in the world, to interact. And that means that we can use ropes and harnesses the way a ballerina uses a point shoe to change our relationship with gravity. I like to describe the relationship as a prosthetic. Your center of gravity changes to the harness that you're wearing. The rope is your suspension system, and it becomes that tenuous connection that you have to the planet. And it allows you to access a much wider range of motion than you can by dancing on the floor. So my personal goals as a choreographer are not to put the dancers in danger